Miles Ghost Hunter here. Philip Markoff was 8 weeks from his wedding. His fiancée was picking flowers for the centerpieces. She had the venue booked, the dress fitted, the guest list finalized. Everything was on schedule. Everything was perfect. Philip Markoff was also picking something, but it was not flowers. He was scrolling through Craigslist, scanning listings posted by young women offering massage services in Boston hotels. He was selecting his next target. I have spent months inside this case. I have read the police reports, the forensic analyses, the court filings that were never heard in open court because this case never made it to trial. And I need to tell you right now, before we go any further, that what I found in this investigation is one of the most disturbing examples of a double life I have ever encountered. Not because of the violence, although the violence is real, but because of how perfectly this man hid what he was, how seamlessly he moved between two worlds. How the people closest to him, the woman who shared his bed, the classmates who sat next to him in anatomy lectures, the professors who graded his exams, how none of them saw a single crack in the mask. Not one. So let me take you back to Boston, back to April of 2009, back to a series of hotel rooms where women answered a knock on the door and found something they never expected on the other side. This is the story of Philip Markoff, and this is the story of the women he hunted. Let us start with the woman who did not survive. Julissa Brisman was 25 years old. She was born and raised in New York City, and if you had met her on any given Tuesday afternoon, you would have met a woman building her life from scratch with both hands. She was not wealthy. She was not connected. She had no safety net beneath her. What she had was ambition and a willingness to work. Julissa had studied at a performing arts school. She had wanted to be an actress. She had that energy about her, that combination of charisma and restlessness that makes a person chase something bigger than what they have. But New York has a way of grinding down ambition when the rent comes due. And by her mid-20s, Julissa was working multiple jobs to keep herself afloat. She waited tables, she bartended, and she offered massage therapy services through online platforms, including Craigslist. This was not unusual. In 2009, Craigslist was one of the largest classified advertising platforms in the United States. Tens of millions of people used it every month. You could find an apartment, buy a used couch, hire a plumber, or book a massage. The platform had a section called Erotic Services, but it also had a legitimate therapeutic services section, and thousands of licensed and unlicensed massage therapists used it as their primary source of clients. Julissa was one of them. Her mother, Carmen Brisman, described her daughter as a fighter. Someone who never stopped moving, never stopped trying. Julissa called her mother regularly. They talked about everything, about work, about auditions, about money, which was always tight, about the future, which Julissa believed would eventually open up if she just kept pushing. On the evening of April 14, 2009, Julissa Brisman had a booking. A new client had contacted her through Craigslist, arranging a massage session at the Holiday Inn Express on Morrissey Boulevard in Boston. The client had been polite in the emails, professional tone, straightforward request. He gave a time and a room number. Julissa traveled from New York to Boston for the appointment. That detail matters. She did not live in Boston. She made the trip specifically for this booking. She packed her massage table, her oils, her supplies. She checked into her own room at the hotel, and then she went to meet her client. She never came back. At approximately 10 p.m. on April 14th, hotel guests on the 4th floor of the Holiday Inn Express heard sounds of a struggle coming from one of the rooms. Muffled impacts. A woman's voice raised in distress, then silence. When hotel security and Boston police entered the room, they found Julissa Brisman on the floor. She had been struck multiple times. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and she had been shot 3 times. The weapon was a small caliber handgun. Julissa was transported to Boston Medical Center. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. She was 25 years old. She had traveled to Boston to earn money for a massage appointment, and she was dead. Now, that alone would be a tragedy. A young woman, working hard, killed during what should have been a routine appointment. But what made this case explode across the city of Boston was what investigators discovered in the hours that followed. Because Julissa Brisman was not the first. 4 days earlier, on April 10th, a woman named Tricia Leffler had checked into the Marriott Copley Place in downtown Boston. Tricia was 29 years old. She had also advertised services on Craigslist. She had also arranged to meet a client at a hotel. The man who came to her room was tall, clean-cut, and polite. He came in, he closed the door, and then, without warning, he pulled out a gun. He forced Tricia to the floor. He bound her hands behind her back with plastic zip ties, the kind you buy at a hardware store, the kind that cut into your wrists if you struggle. He took her cash. He took her credit cards. Then he left. He walked out of the Marriott Copley Place, past the concierge, past the lobby, and into the night. Tricia Leffler was shaken, terrified, but alive. She had been robbed at gunpoint and restrained, but she had not been seriously injured. She reported the attack to police, and then, on April 16th, 2 days after Julissa Brisman was killed, another attack. A different hotel, a different woman, same pattern. A woman who had advertised services on Craigslist, a man who showed up, pulled a weapon, produced zip ties, and robbed her. This victim was also struck. She was also bound. She survived. 3 attacks, 3 hotels, 3 women, all connected by Craigslist, all in the Boston metropolitan area, all within a span of 6 days. Boston Police Department now had a serial predator on their hands, and the media gave him a name before the police gave him handcuffs. They called him the Craigslist Killer. Now, here is where the investigation begins. And I want you to follow this carefully, because the speed at which Boston PD moved on this case was remarkable. Not because they had overwhelming evidence. In the beginning, they had almost nothing. But because they understood one critical thing. This predator was accelerating. 6 days, 3 attacks. The violence was increasing. Tricia Leffler was robbed. The second victim was robbed and assaulted. Julissa Brisman was robbed and killed. If they did not find this man fast, there would be a 4th victim, and a 5th. So let me walk you through what the detectives had. First, the hotel surveillance cameras. The Marriott Copley Place, the Holiday Inn Express, and the 3rd hotel all had security camera systems covering their lobbies, through the hotel corridors. This man was not panicking. He was not rushing. He walked through these hotels like he belonged there. But the footage was not high resolution. The baseball cap obscured much of his face. They had a silhouette, a build, a general description. They did not have an identity. Second, the Craigslist communications. All 3 victims had been contacted through the platform by someone arranging appointments. The emails were professional in tone. No red flags, no threatening language, just a man booking a service. But every email that passes through the internet leaves a digital fingerprint, an IP address, a numerical identifier that traces back to the device and the network that sent it. The Boston Police Cybercrime Unit pulled the IP addresses from the emails sent to the victims, and every single email traced back to the same source, the same IP address, the same internet connection, and that connection was located in a residential building in Quincy, Massachusetts, a quiet town just south of Boston, a place where medical students rent affordable apartments close to campus. Now, an IP address alone does not give you a name. It gives you a location. It gives you a building, sometimes a specific unit if the internet service provider cooperates. But in this case, the building was an apartment complex, and the detectives needed to narrow the field. Who lived in that building? Who matched the physical description from the hotel cameras? Who had a connection to the dates and times of all 3 attacks? The answer came back within days, and the name that came back was one that made every detective in the room pause. Philip Markoff, age 23, second-year student at Boston University School of Medicine, resident of the apartment complex in Quincy. Tall, athletic build, light hair, clean record, 0 prior arrests, 0 criminal history, 0 red flags of any kind, and engaged to be married. His fiancée was a woman named Megan McAllister. They had been together since their undergraduate years at the State University of New York at Albany. The wedding was set for August 2009, 8 weeks away. Let me paint this picture clearly because it matters. Philip Markoff, at the moment detectives identified him as their primary suspect, was living a life that looked like a recruitment poster for the American dream. Medical school, beautiful fiancée, wedding on the horizon, career in surgery ahead of him. He had no debt issues that anyone knew about, no substance abuse problems that anyone reported, no history of violence, no restraining orders, no disciplinary actions at the university. His classmates described him as quiet, smart, and focused. His professors had no complaints. His neighbors in Quincy had never heard a disturbance from his apartment. And yet, every piece of digital evidence pointed directly at him. The IP address, the physical description, the timeline, it all converged on this one man in this one apartment, in this one quiet town. But the detectives needed more. An IP address and a silhouette are not enough for an arrest warrant when your suspect is a medical student with no record. They needed physical evidence. They needed something inside that apartment. So they watched him. For days, Boston PD conducted surveillance on Philip Markoff. They followed his movements. They monitored his routine. Medical school in the morning, library in the afternoon, home in the evening. Megan McAllister coming and going, groceries, laundry. The mundane choreography of a young couple 8 weeks from their wedding. And while they watched, they built their case. They obtained records from Craigslist. They obtained records from the internet service provider. They cross-referenced cell phone tower data with the locations and times of each attack. Philip Markoff's phone had connected to cell towers near each of the 3 hotels on the nights of the attacks. His phone, his device, his signal, placing him within blocks of each crime scene at the precise time each crime occurred. The net was tightening, and Philip Markoff had no idea. On April 20th, 2009, 6 days after Julissa Brisman was killed, Philip Markoff and Megan McAllister got into their car and drove south on Interstate 95. They were heading to Foxwoods Resort Casino in Connecticut. A couple on an outing, a normal evening. Maybe they were celebrating something. Maybe they just wanted to get out of the city. They never made it to the casino. Massachusetts State Police pulled them over on I-95 near the Connecticut border. Multiple unmarked vehicles, officers approaching from both sides. Philip Markoff was ordered out of the car. He was placed in handcuffs on the shoulder of the highway. Megan McAllister sat in the passenger seat and watched her fiancé being arrested for armed robbery and murder. The arrest was clean. No resistance, no chase. Markoff did not run. He did not fight. He stood on the side of the highway in the April chill and let the officers put the cuffs on. He said very little. Megan McAllister said quite a lot. Not to the police, to the media. Within hours of the arrest, she released a statement that would be quoted in every newspaper in the country. And I want you to hear her exact words, because they tell you everything about how completely Philip Markoff had deceived the people closest to him. She said, quote, "Philip is a beautiful person, inside and out. He is intelligent, loving, and loyal. He would not hurt a fly. All I have to say to you is, you have the wrong man. Philip could not have done this. He is the man I love and plan to marry." End quote. She believed it, completely, without reservation. The man she had dated for years, the man she slept beside every night, the man whose wedding dress she had already purchased, could not possibly be the Craigslist killer. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And then the police searched their apartment. What they found inside that apartment in Quincy, Massachusetts, dismantled every illusion Megan McAllister or anyone else had ever held about Philip Markoff. Under the bed, concealed beneath stacks of medical textbooks, detectives found a semi-automatic handgun. Ballistic analysis would later confirm it was the weapon used to shoot Julissa Brisman. They found a collection of plastic zip ties, the same type used to restrain Tricia Leffler at the Marriott. They found rolls of duct tape. They found a knife. And they found the trophies. Tucked inside the pages of anatomy textbooks, stored in a hollow section behind the books on a shelf, detectives found women's underwear. Multiple pairs, different sizes, different colors. These did not belong to Megan McAllister. These belonged to his victims. Philip Markoff had been collecting souvenirs. Each attack, each woman he subdued, each hotel room he walked into with a gun and zip ties, he took something. Not just cash, not just credit cards. He took an intimate item, something personal, something that belonged to the woman he had just terrorized. And he brought it home. And he hid it among his medical school textbooks, in the apartment he shared with his fiancée, in the bed where they slept together. This is what the detectives found. This is what Megan McAllister learned about the man she called beautiful, inside and out. Let me now reconstruct what Philip Markoff actually was. Because the gap between what he presented to the world and what he did in hotel rooms is the core of this entire case. Philip Markoff was born on February 12, 1986, in Sherrill, New York, small town, central New York State. His parents divorced when he was young. He was raised primarily by his mother. By all accounts, his childhood was unremarkable. He was a good student. He played volleyball. He was tall, good-looking, and sociable enough to make friends without standing out in any dramatic way. He attended the State University of New York at Albany, where he studied biology. His grades were strong enough to gain admission to Boston University School of Medicine, which is not easy. This was a competitive program. Philip Markoff was smart enough to get in and disciplined enough to stay in. He met Megan McAllister at SUNY Albany. They began dating. They moved to the Boston area together when he started medical school. She was studying to become a teacher. They were, by every visible metric, a young couple building a life together. But beneath that surface, Philip Markoff had developed a secret life that none of his visible routines revealed. He was a habitual gambler. Online poker, casino trips. The amounts varied, but the pattern was consistent. He was spending money he did not have, and the losses were accumulating. Financial pressure was building, and he told no one. Not Megan, not his family, not his friends. And at some point, the gambling debts intersected with something else, something darker, something that had nothing to do with money. Philip Markoff began trolling Craigslist. Specifically, he began targeting women who advertised massage and escort services. He created fake email accounts. He used careful, professional language. He booked appointments. He showed up at hotel rooms. He brought weapons, restraints, and a plan. The first known attack was Tricia Leffler on April 10th. He knocked on her door at the Marriott Copley Place. She let him in because he was the client she was expecting. He pulled the gun. He produced the zip ties. He bound her. He robbed her. He left. 4 days later, he contacted Julissa Brisman through Craigslist. She traveled from New York to Boston. She went to his room at the Holiday Inn Express. He was waiting. What happened inside that room, based on the forensic evidence, was a robbery that became a murder. Julissa fought back. She did not comply quietly the way Tricia Leffler had. She resisted. She struggled. And Philip Markoff, 23 years old, second-year medical student, 8 weeks from his wedding, shot her 3 times. He then left the hotel. He walked through the lobby. He went home. He went to sleep beside Megan McAllister. 2 days after that, he attacked another woman in another hotel. Same method: gun, zip ties, robbery. 3 attacks in 6 days, escalating violence. A man who was learning, adapting, refining his method with each encounter. A man who was, by every clinical definition, a predator in the making. And no one around him noticed a thing. I want to stay on that point because it is the part of this case that should keep you awake. This was not a man living in isolation. This was not a drifter, a loner, someone on the margins of society. Philip Markoff was embedded in a community. He attended classes 5 days a week. He interacted with professors, classmates, clinical supervisors. He came home every evening to a woman who loved him. He ate dinner with her. He watched television with her. He discussed wedding plans with her. And on the nights he was binding women with zip ties and robbing them at gunpoint. On the night he shot Julissa Brisman to death. He came home and slid into bed beside his fiancée without a tremor, without a hesitation, without a single visible sign that anything was wrong. Megan McAllister noticed nothing. She noticed no change in his behavior, no unexplained absences, no agitation, no strange phone calls, no suspicious items, nothing. She went on planning her wedding as if everything was normal because, from her perspective, everything was normal. That is the nature of what Philip Markoff was. Not a man who snapped, not a man who lost control. A man who maintained absolute control. A man who compartmentalized his life so completely that the violent predator and the devoted fiancée existed side by side without interference. He moved between these two identities the way you move between rooms in a house. Close one door, open the other. Different room, different rules. Different person. The detectives who worked this case told reporters that the most unsettling thing about Philip Markoff was not the violence, it was the calm. The absolute, unshakable calm of a man who had just committed a murder and then went home to talk about seating arrangements for his wedding reception. Now, after the arrest, after the search of the apartment, after the ballistic match and the IP trace and the cell tower data and the surveillance footage, the case against Philip Markoff was overwhelming. Suffolk County District Attorney Daniel Conley charged him with first-degree murder in the death of Julissa Brisman, armed robbery, and kidnapping in connection with the attacks on Tricia Leffler and the third victim. Philip Markoff was held without bail at the Nashua Street Jail in Boston. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense attorneys prepared to fight. They challenged the evidence. They questioned the identification procedures. They signaled that they would mount an aggressive defense at trial. The case was set for a court date. The wheels of the justice system began to turn, and the world watched. This case had become a national sensation. The Craigslist killer, the handsome medical student, the perfect life that hid a predator. It was on every cable news channel, every newspaper front page, every true crime blog. The contrast was irresistible. White coat and zip ties, wedding plans and gun residue, the American dream and the hotel room floor where Julissa Brisman died. Megan McAllister eventually broke off the engagement. She did not make another public statement. She disappeared from the media entirely. Whatever she learned about the man she had planned to marry, she chose to process it in private. She eventually moved on. She married another man in a different state. She changed her name and built a new life as far from the Craigslist killer story as geography and time would allow. Philip Markoff sat in his cell at Nashua Street Jail. He waited. The trial date approached. The prosecution was confident. The defense was preparing. The evidence was strong. The outcome seemed inevitable. But Philip Markoff was not going to let a jury decide his fate. On August 15, 2010, 16 months after his arrest, a guard at the Nashua Street Jail conducted a routine check on Philip Markoff's cell. It was a standard wellness check, the kind that happens multiple times per day in a maximum security facility. The guard found Philip Markoff dead. He had taken his own life. He had used a plastic bag and a makeshift blade that he had concealed in his cell. The method was deliberate. It was planned. Philip Markoff, the medical student who knew exactly where to cut, had used that knowledge one final time. But that is not what stopped the investigators in their tracks. That is not what made the guards stand in the doorway of that cell and stare. What stopped them was the wall. On the concrete wall of his cell, Philip Markoff had written a single word. He had written it in his own blood. The word was Megan. And the date of his death, August 15th, 2010, was the date that had originally been scheduled for his wedding to Megan McAllister. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I have sat with it for weeks, and I still do not fully understand what it means. A man who hunted women on Craigslist. A man who bound them with zip ties and robbed them at gunpoint. A man who shot a 25-year-old woman to death and then went home and discussed wedding flowers. That man, in the final minutes of his life, wrote his fiancée's name in blood on his cell wall. On the day they were supposed to be married. What does that tell us? Was it love? Was it obsession? Was it manipulation? One final performance for an audience that would never hear his side? Was it guilt? Was it self-pity? Was it a man who genuinely could not reconcile the two halves of himself, who loved Megan McAllister with one part of his brain, while another part of his brain drove him into hotel rooms with a gun? I do not know, and neither does anyone else. Because Philip Markoff never explained himself. He never testified. He never gave a statement. He never sat in a courtroom and faced a jury. He never looked at Carmen Brisman, Julissa's mother, and answered for what he did. He never gave Tricia Leffler the closure of seeing him convicted. He took the coward's exit. He chose the wall of his cell over the witness stand. And because he did, because Philip Markoff killed himself before the trial, he was never convicted. Under American law, a defendant who dies before trial is presumed innocent. The charges were dismissed. The case was closed. Philip Markoff, despite the gun under his bed, the zip ties in his drawer, the trophies hidden in his textbooks, the IP address, the cell tower data, the surveillance footage, and the ballistic match, Philip Markoff was never found guilty of anything. Julissa Brisman's mother, Carmen, gave interviews after Markoff's death. She was asked how she felt, and she said something that I have not been able to get out of my head. She said, quote, "He took the easy way out. He robbed me twice. First he took my daughter, then he took my chance to see him answer for it." End quote. That is what this case leaves behind. Not a verdict, not a sentence, not justice. A mother who was robbed twice. A fiancée who had to rebuild her entire identity. Survivors who never got their day in court. And a name written in blood on a jail cell wall. Now, I want to close this by stepping back and looking at what this case actually shows us. Because it is easy to get lost in the drama of the Craigslist killer story. The handsome medical student, the perfect mask, the name in blood. It reads like fiction. It plays like a movie. And that is exactly the problem. When a case becomes entertainment, when the killer becomes the character, we lose sight of the people who matter. Julissa Brisman was not a plot point. She was a 25-year-old woman who was trying to build a life in an expensive city. She was working multiple jobs. She was calling her mother on the phone. She was making plans. She had a future that she believed in, a future that was taken from her by a man who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity. Tricia Leffler survived, but surviving an armed robbery at the hands of a man who zip-tied your wrists and held a gun to your head is not the same as being unharmed. The physical wounds heal. The rest of it does not go away. And here is what I keep coming back to. Philip Markoff was not some aberration. He was not a monster who crawled out of the darkness. He was a product of the same world we all live in. He went to college. He went to medical school. He had friends, a family, a social circle that included him without hesitation. He existed within the systems that are supposed to catch people like him. The educational system, the social system, the relational system, and none of those systems detected what he was. The woman who slept beside him every night did not know. The professors who evaluated him did not know. The classmates who studied with him did not know. Because Philip Markoff was not performing normalcy the way we usually imagine predators doing it. He was not sweating through a mask. He was not struggling to maintain a facade. By every indication, his normal life was genuinely comfortable for him. He sat in anatomy lectures and learned about the human body. He went home and hid a gun under his medical textbooks. These two activities coexisted in the same person without apparent friction. That is what makes this case different from a Ted Bundy or a Dennis Rader. Bundy was charismatic and charming, but people who knew him well eventually sensed something off. Rader lived a double life for decades, but there were cracks. There were moments where the mask slipped. With Markoff, the mask never slipped. There were no cracks. The revelation came entirely from digital evidence, from IP addresses and cell tower pings and surveillance cameras. Without technology, Philip Markoff might never have been caught. Without technology, he might have gone on to become Dr. Philip Markoff, surgeon, husband, father, pillar of the community, and no one would have ever known what he did in those hotel rooms in April of 2009. That thought should bother you. It bothers me. Because if a man can commit 3 violent attacks in 6 days, including 1 murder, and then return to his normal life without a single person around him noticing anything unusual, then how many others are doing the same thing right now? How many people are sitting in classrooms, in offices, in living rooms, maintaining a surface that reveals nothing about what lies beneath? I am not saying this to make you paranoid. I am saying this because the Philip Markoff case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the limits of human perception. We believe that we can read people. We believe that violence leaves marks, that predators give off signals, that evil is detectable if you know what to look for. Philip Markoff is proof that it is not always true. Sometimes the signal is invisible. Sometimes the mask is indistinguishable from the face. Last week we looked at Ted Bundy, a man who weaponized charm and charisma to lure his victims. Bundy was a performer. He played a role, and he played it brilliantly. But it was still a performance. Philip Markoff was something different. He was not performing. He simply existed in 2 realities simultaneously, and neither reality contaminated the other. Next time, we are going to look at a case that pushes this concept even further. A man who did not hide behind a medical degree or a wedding ring. He hid behind something far more powerful, a pulpit, a collar, the trust of an entire congregation. And when the truth came out, it did not just destroy one family. It destroyed a community's faith in the one institution they believed could never betray them. That is next time. Episode 17. Miles, Ghost Hunter here. I will see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the people we trust the most are sometimes the ones we should question the most.